Good evening and welcome to the Township of Woolwich Council meeting on May 9th, 2023. We are now live on YouTube. I will start with a roll call of council. I, Councillor Grant, am present and chairing this meeting. Mayor Shantz?
Present.
Councillor Bryant?
Present.
Councillor Burgess sends his regrets. Councillor Cadeau?
Present.
And Councillor Schwint?
Present.
Thank you. We will now need a resolution to reconvene in open session. Do I have a mover? Councillor Bryant? And a seconder, Mayor Shantz. Thank you. And now I will move on to the land acknowledgement. Oh, sorry. All in favor? It's the first day. Thank you. That is carried. So for the land acknowledgement, I would like to acknowledge the land on which we live has been here from time immemorial, and that Indigenous people have lived here from time immemorial. I thank the Chinnan, also called the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people who have lived here and cared for this land and who continue to share and steward this land with us. May we together learn to care for each other, our flora and fauna, and the land that sustains us. All right, moving on to our agenda for the evening. We have no disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we also have no items to come forward from closed session, no public meetings, no presentations, no delegations, and no unfinished business, but we do have some consent items. Before we pass a motion approving and receiving the balance of consent items, does anyone on council wish to remove an item for further discussion? All right, seeing none. Is there anyone who would like to move the consent agenda? Councillor Cadeau and a seconder, Councillor Bryant. All those in favor? That is carried. And then we have, oh. So then, right. We also have now for the next one, items pulled from the information package. So this is something that I've asked for to be pulled from the information package. This is the Township of Montague's resolution in support of Bill 5, the Stopping Harassment and Abuse by Local Leaders Act. I don't know if Jeff, if you wanted to take on some of this.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to give some background on this item. Just pulling up my notes. Bear with me here. So currently, Council's Code of Conduct does not have anything regarding workplace violence and harassment. And Bill 5 is a proposal to make sure that that is included. If that is included, if there is a violence and harassment investigation and the Township's Integrity Commissioner believes that the member has contravened the Code of Conduct, Council could choose to impose a reprimand, or a suspension of pay for up to 90 days, which are existing penalties under your Code of Conduct. But under a workplace violence and harassment investigation, Council could also direct the Integrity Commissioner to apply to Superior Court to remove the member if violence and harassment has been found to occur. Applications to the court cannot be made between nomination day and voting day, so not during an election period. Then it would be up to the judge to make a final decision to declare the member's seat vacant. If the seat is vacated, the member would be ineligible to run or be appointed to office for the next 2 regular elections. So you can see that there's, it's a fairly large change in terms of protecting members of staff or other members of council from violence and harassment by members of council. As I mentioned, it is a proposed bill, but I know some other municipalities have been supporting that and referring the matter to their MPs to say we support having legislation like this. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. Not really a question, but just for council's knowledge, regional council just passed something similar today also in committee.
Thank you. Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I think that, when I was reading over this item in particular, anything that's going to enhance accountability is something that, elected politicians should get behind, I would like to believe. So 100% I can get behind it for that level of accountability, but more so really promoting the diversity, equity, inclusion. That's an important piece for me. And in addition to that, having some meaningful consequences for individuals who do cross that line, I think that it's important for us to explore further. That's not to say that I don't have concerns with this bill as it currently sits. It does allow for some subjectivity, I think, and it could open some doors to over-reliance on this rather than maybe navigating more informal mechanisms of dispute resolution. So there are some concerns from that angle. I guess the other concern would be that if, heaven forbid, Woolwich had a case like this, what would be the ramifications from a legal point of view if this were to go forward, somebody was removed from office? I would suspect there would be some sort of a legal challenge, which could be lengthy. And what would the ramifications be for the ability of Woolwich to carry on business? And I'm not trying to, take away from an event that may have happened. I think that there needs to be those meaningful consequences, as I had suggested. There would be concerns that we should be mindful of if we're going to endorse this around what does that liability look like for the township. So with that, I would welcome any other comments or dialogue around this.
Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. It could get a little bit difficult. What I like about it is the involvement of the integrity commissioner. I mean, we can't just be sort of throwing duly elected people out of office just because we don't like, a decision they made, and that's not where this is going. Obviously, it's much more serious. But I do like that it's the integrity commissioner that has some sort of control over that. So it's not just someone in the community making an allegation that is frivolous, I suppose.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. I think council needs to be held accountable for their actions. And if you're going to say and do things that are not in the best interest of staff and the public, then you should be held accountable, and there needs to be a way to do that. So I do support what this is suggesting.
All right. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Or is there a recommendation?
I'll make a recommendation that we support this motion.
And seconded by Councillor Bryant. All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? And that is carried. And this brings us to staff memos and reports. The first item we have is C20-2023 temporary extension of outdoor alcohol licensed premises, and Jeff will be presenting this.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I'm sorry I turned my camera off there for a second. Thinking I'm back up again. So the AGCO, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, has authorized municipalities to issue temporary extensions for outdoor alcohol licensed premises. And what this means is if like a bar or a restaurant had an alcohol license already, then they could extend their license to cover an outdoor premises. This has nothing to do with the township's patio extension policy that was approved during COVID, also for business support. But what it would do is allow a business to, if they had an approved patio, to extend alcohol onto that patio. I should say this is a fairly new process for the township. We don't issue alcohol licenses. That has previously been exclusively the jurisdiction of the AGCO. But in this case, we thought it might be a good report to bring to council's attention, because if we ever do have a situation like COVID, it would allow us to pivot very quickly and allow businesses to keep operating in the way that they did and have a temporary patio extension. I definitely think, and I've sort of included in this report, that I think if a business is doing a patio extension year after year after year, they should consider doing a permanent extension through the AGCO. And this is really a good opportunity for a business to say, try a new type of business on the patio, or if a situation like COVID arose again, to give them that flexibility to do that, and we could pivot more quickly by taking that responsibility on. With that, we propose a fee of $225. It's lower than the AGCO's fee, but there is still staff time to recover these. To approve these permits, and then that would recover most of that staff time. I think that's everything I wanted to say, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that council may have.
Councillor Trudeau.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. As I read through this report, the policy included the following requirements. Number 5, the capacity allowed for at least 1.1 square meters per person. Is that an artifact of COVID and distancing, or is that just having to do with legislation that exists? I'm just trying to get a sense on why we would need that.
Through you, Madam Chair, that is a requirement of the AGCO. That's not optional. That would be something we would have to adhere to. And our building department has been reviewing the size and layout of the patios, or sorry, the extension area, to make sure that an applicant meets that and then sets a limit of the number of people.
Councillor Schwint.
Thanks. Very sensitive because of noise at the moment. Wondering if there's location requirements in terms of distances from lot lines or neighboring houses, etc.
So again, through you, our anticipation is that for this process, we don't need to set anything out in our alcohol extension requirements. There are requirements for a patio in general. So a business has to have an approved patio. And then the other piece is bringing this back to council so we could follow all the same processes that would normally come through council. If residents aren't happy, they can email their councillor, they can come as a delegation, and they can register to say, we're not supportive of this. Then it would be council's ability to grant or deny that application. The only thing I would say then is if council denies it as a temporary, a temporary application, the applicant could still go to the AGCO and apply for a permanent one, and they'd have to go through that same process. So you can say no to a temporary, but the person could still apply for a permanent.
Are there any further discussions or questions? Seeing none, there is a recommendation in the report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Trudeau, seconded by Councillor Bryant. All those in favor? And that is carried. All right, so the next one we have is, let me see, DS 12-2023 consent application bill 18/2022 and bill B19/2022 noise warning agreement. And this is Director Fries.
So yeah, real quick explanation. The Committee of Adjustment approved this application to sever the property in St. Jacobs on King Street to create 2 residential lots. As part of that approval, there was a condition imposed for a noise warning clause to be implemented on then 2 new lots. So this report is just requesting that that agreement be authorized by the mayor and clerk.
Right. Is there any discussions on this item? Seeing none, there is a recommendation in this report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Mayor Shawns. And a seconder by Councillor Trudeau. All those in favor? And that is carried as well. And then the next item is 12.3 IS 07-2023 Special Service Levy Survey Results for the Unsurfaced Areas of Maryhill. And this is presented by Director Poupey.
Thank you, Chair Grant, and through you to members of council. Staff are just reporting back on direction received January 23rd from council to engage the members of the community of the unserviced areas in Maryhill regarding water servicing. We have done that. We broke up Maryhill into 3 different parts. We had an opportunity with a road reconstruction happening through a regional project that would involve Maryhill Road south of Charles Street towards Notre Dame. And then we also looked at the region section of Charles Street, St. Charles Street, apologize, which would be west of Maryhill Road, and then further looked at the north piece of Maryhill Road, which is in the Township of Woolwich's jurisdiction. Of the 73 properties, we're always happy to report this. We certainly seek people's opinion, and over 85% response rate. I think any survey would be quite happy with that kind of response rate. So we did provide a deadline as typical for special service levies, and then further follow up with those who we haven't responded, almost hound some people sometimes just to get a response. And I think, that's generally what happens in Woolwich. A lot of people are engaged. So we're quite happy to report that we believe this to be accurate in the sense that there was very little interest in Maryhill, unfortunately. With that, staff are recommending to not proceed with a special service levy for water servicing. There is no health and safety need at this time, and staff are just typically seeking to not again go out for a special service levy unless at the direction of council at any point. But we would typically wait for another renewal project if we were going to do another reconstruction project or something like that, that we would maybe engage at that time, which we're estimating to around 15 to 20 or so years. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Through you to Jared. Just a comment. I heard from a few residents that felt they were being pressured into signing up to go on township water. I think they didn't totally understand what you were putting out to them in the questionnaire. So I think just something for future thought when you're doing this, maybe make it very clear that this is an option. You're just looking for feedback at this point or something, because they felt that they were sort of being almost forced into signing up. Because I read some of the comments and they were not, I guess, I don't know how to put it kindly, but they weren't in favor, and they seemed to feel they were being pressured into something that they didn't want to do at this point in time. Anyway, that's just my comments.
Thank you. Are there any other discussions or questions on this item? All right, seeing none, there is a recommendation in the report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Schwint and a seconder. Councillor Cadell. All those in favor? That's carried. And then our next item is 12.4 ISO 9-2023 tender award for the 2023 paving program. And this is also Mr. Poupé.
Thank you, Chair Grant, and through you to members of council. We're happy to present this report for council's consideration. We can say that it was very competitive bidding. It's always good to see. We had 6 bidders. I think between first and second was 4% spread, and then between the third and the first was just under 10%. But they were all competitive bids from what we could tell. We are asking council to award to the low bid contractor. In this case, it's Cox Construction Limited for just under 2.2 million. That is under budget, as you can see in the detailed report. There is an end date to this work. We have identified September 29th to have all the work complete. That allows some flexibility for contractor as well as when they start, which we think does reflect better in pricing. I think I do want to bring the council's attention. There was a road that we were not contemplating at the time of budget. It came up later. It was through discussions with both the region of Waterloo and Waterloo Central Railroad. It's more an economic development piece at the end of Howard Street. The road has been closed off because of the state of the asphalt. And there was an ask if we could come up with a funding mechanism to sort of 3-way split this, which we have done. And you see that reflected in the financial impacts, and we were able to insert that into our larger tender. So again, in good economy of scale, it is an economic development piece in that the train from WCR does bring tourists into Elmira, and then there is a local outfit then with kitchen cuttings that then meets them up on with a tractor and takes people into to Elmira. And so we thought that that would be an appropriate piece. I just wanted to bring that to council's attention that is in there, and we are still under budget. So that's good news for all. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion? Councillor Cadell.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Director Poupey. And this might be an unfair question to you, Director. But I recognize that you had mentioned the spread was 4% between the top and the second one that came in. I also recognize, the location of the two, and not necessarily for this round, but I think moving forward, are we going to put on that environmental lens? And I'm not sure that, the company is going to be hauling in asphalt from their location, or if they're getting it more locally. But if one of the companies is right here within Woolwich, would they be, getting that material from the location that's in closer proximity, thereby reducing the carbon footprint, bringing in materials? If you know what I'm getting at, that's kind of where my mind's going. So can you speak to that at all?
Through Chair Grant to Councillor Cadell, I guess I'll attempt in that it is a competitive bid process. We do have low bidders, and I appreciate that we do have a local contractor who has always bid our work, who has had our paving tender many times in the 10 years that I've been here. Certainly over half of them likely have been by that contractor. So I think it's just a snapshot in time with the workload that every contractor has. You're always vying for, there's only so many players, I guess, in the industry as well that bid this work. Trucking and fuel play into this immensely when they're pricing this out. So obviously contractors have counted that cost. I appreciate that if you're closer, there could be less of an environmental impact, but I don't know how we would really address that issue, other than we would deem these to be generally local contractors. Cox and Capital and Steven Evans, like all the contractors except for I think EC King was local, and they likely would have sourced somebody locally. So that, I think that does happen. There's a lot of subcontracted work that happens as well. So where they get their gravel may not be, where they'd get it if they had a Guelph job, for example, or a job in Kitchener or Waterloo. So I think there is inherently some environmental considerations there just as a result of cost.
Is there any further discussions? Yeah, Councillor Schwinn.
A little bit off topic, but I see the map of Howard Avenue up there, and I see that blank piece of property that used to be the transfer station. I'm wondering if maybe the CAO has any comments on future plans for that site.
No, we'd have to do some research. I don't have any information for you this evening in terms of future plans.
Yeah, and Mr. Petherick, I've seen you've popped in.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to kind of go back to Councillor Godot's question, and really this sometimes kind of relays into the purchasing side of things. And a purchasing bylaw has to be fair, transparent, and open. And I think right now we don't have the provisions that really has an environmental lens. That is something that I think if we wanted to incorporate into a future tender, that is something that needs to be put into the tender document, so that anybody that is bidding on it would be aware that that is a criteria that needs to be met, or it would be a factor within how you would be awarding that contract. Since it wasn't in this tender, I think you're at that low bid, I think that Mr. Poupey talked about. So I just want to add that context for council.
Thank you. Mr. Councillor Cadell.
Yeah, thank
Mr.
you.
is fine. Yeah.
And thanks to Director Plethorick for that. That's helpful context to have. In all honesty, I didn't really think that it would have an impact on this round just because RFP had gone out and everything else. But I think moving forward, that is something that I would like to see some consideration put in. And I know that it's going to be a challenge and until we have staffing that has this as a portfolio, or at least, people that can put the effort that's needed to try to capture some of these data that's a little more difficult to put a number on. So all that to say, I look forward to how this could be adapted into the future.
All right. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, there is a recommendation in the report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Schwinn, and seconded by Councillor Cadell. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. And then I believe this is Jared's last one of the evening, but this is IS 10-2023 tender award for contract 2023-06 Halter Avenue, Isley Drive, and Notre Dame Avenue reconstruction in Maryhill.
Thank you, Chair Grant, through you to council. This will be the first of probably quite a few tender award reports for reconstruction projects in the township. This is actually a second phase of the work that was started in 2014. The reason that this rose to the top for reconstruction in Maryhill was because we attend a lot of times for dealing with water quality concerns in Maryhill. So it was the metallic pipe that we were looking to replace. That was what was driving it. And we did see some improvements through phase one, and we expect to see even more improvements here in phase two. The remainder of Maryhill is all PVC pipe. So this will be the end of the cast and the ductile iron main in Maryhill, which will certainly help from a staffing perspective. So again, happy to report that we're within budget, below budget. It was again another competitive process. And I believe we were, there was less than 1% between 1 and 2. I think it was $16,000 on the almost $2 million project. So that's quite competitive there, and just over 8% between first and third. We did, as with any reconstruction project, we typically do a 2-year design process, 3rd year construction. That gives us time, obviously, to engage the public. There was a public consultation center that was held. Typically, they're well attended when they're in person. Obviously, we've had to adjust through COVID, and likely what we're going to do is have both. We'll likely do an in-person and a virtual. We can keep the virtual up for longer, and that just gives more flexibility for people to respond. Generally in Woolwich, they've been very well attended anyway prior to COVID, and we expect that to continue, but just thought that there's another tool in the toolbox that we can engage the public with, both virtually and in person. With all that said, the recommendation is to award the contract to Drexler Construction Limited for just north of 1.8 million, and as well to retain the consultant Dillon Consulting Limited for the contract administration and inspection duties for just over $150,000. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Bryant.
You knew I'd jump in on this one. Through you to Mr. Poupé. I have some questions for you. When they did the first round of construction, we had problems with the drainage ditches. They weren't draining, and they're still not draining. So will these ditches be fixed as part of this reconstruction of the road?
Yeah, through Chair Grant to Councillor Bryant. So I would say that the first phase of ditching, we did go through an evolution. We don't think they're all not working. We think there's some localized areas that can need improvement. And yes, we are looking to address those issues as part of this reconstruction project.
I'm glad to hear that, because I know there's a number of seniors in that area, and the ditches, because of the slope and the water sitting in them, they're not going to be able to maintain them. They've already made that apparent, they've told me. So I do want to make sure we get these drains fixed. And I think I'm just glad it's being done, but I do want to make sure that those ditches do get corrected, because again, with mosquitoes and the inability to cut them, we don't want it turning into an overgrown mess, I guess, along these ditches. So that's why I'm raising that particular issue. And another question would be the in-person consultations. When will they be happening? Do you have any idea?
Through Chair Grant to Councillor Bryant. So that process is complete for this project. So what will happen now, there'll be a notification letter sent to all residents once we have an understanding of the contractor's schedule. This is another end date contract, so it's not a working day contract. So we'll need to understand when they plan to start. But work is expected to be complete by October 27th. So at that point, we will send notice, and we will copy council in on that notification letter. When that goes to the public, council will obviously receive an email as well, notifying council that that's been sent out.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions or discussions? Seeing none, there is a recommendation in the report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Bryant, and seconded by Councillor Cadeau. All those in favor? And yep, that's carried.
Thank you.
All right, we have 12.6 now, R03-2023, the recreation bylaw. And Thomas is here to fill us in on some of that.
Perfect, thank you. Through you, Chair Grant, to Council. So RCS has a recommendation before you this evening for approval of the recreation bylaw, as well as the set fines. So the bylaw review was prompted by staff as a result of some vandalism, nuisance issues that we were dealing with in localized parks throughout the township. That was through the pandemic into early 2022. Happy to report that we did implement some changes to park hours at that time, and also some of those issues have just naturally kind of moved on. And so in addition to addressing that, staff also saw the opportunity to make improvements just based on some experiences, township experiences, current processes with regards to property access, that sort of thing. And then also we wanted to address new transportation options, technologies, as well as clean up and consolidate the fines, as well as generalize the actual facilities and parks listed, which were all individually listed on the previous bylaw. So notable changes include, like I said, the addition of e-bikes and scooters as permitted uses on trails, the use of washroom facilities based on lived gender identities, clarification on our winter maintenance practices in our parks, parking lots, clarification on processes for accessing township lands. So we do allow for access through township lands for private construction, but there is a permit process in place for that. And then lastly, we wanted to allow for staff some flexibility with regards to park hours. If we do have issues at certain parks, it would give us, this new updated bylaw would give us the option to adjust hours and post hours for that specific park until such a time that maybe an issue is resolved, or like I said, the issue has kind of moved on from that area. So with that, happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Are there any questions? Mayor Shantz.
I think I understand the rationale, but I also kind of question the walk, skate on any pond, stream, or river. Okay, yeah. I don't know. I grew up walking through streams in Kitchener, and my kids grew up having access at the cottage and other places to the natural environment. And so I guess I question that a little bit from the point of view. I understand the need to protect them, so I get that, but how do we manage the ability, particularly for kids, to explore the natural world, because that's how they're going to understand it and appreciate it.
I'm happy to provide a bit of an answer, or at least get some dialogue going, Mayor Sean. So I guess as council can appreciate, this is more of a safety concern for staff, addressing liability, but then also as I'm sure infrastructure services could speak to, some of our storm ponds are a piece of infrastructure. I guess as I've included in the report, bylaws first course of action is always education, and so we would continue to utilize that approach. Clerk Smith and I couldn't think of any recent actual fines that have been issued under the recreation bylaw. So I could just add that context. It would definitely be on enforcement would be on if we received a complaint, and then we would start with education. We want to make sure as well that kids are being safe and that sort of thing.
Mayor Shantz.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so that fee has always been there. That's nothing new. It's just increased the fine, correct?
Yeah, through you, Chair Grant, with regards to the fees, there's an increase in the fees, yes.
Councillor Schwinn.
I want to follow up on Mayor Johnson's comments and that. Why don't we want kids walking along these rivers, in these rivers, learning about nature, cooling off in July, by getting their feet wet? The pollute part definitely should stay in. And saying we're not going to force it, to me is not an answer, because it shouldn't be in the bylaw if that's not in our intent. So I would like to see us remove why preceding pollute.
Is there any discussion on that? Councillor Bryant.
I had to think for a minute. If we're protecting stormwater ponds, maybe take the stormwater ponds out or clearly define what elements you're trying to protect. Like the streams, I don't see them as an issue, as both the mayor and Councillor Swint has said. It's an education piece basically for the kids. But if you're talking stormwater ponds, then I see that as a potential for a child to get injured. Let's put it that way. And I think maybe that's something that needs to be identified, and then you can pull that one out of your bylaw or reword it somehow.
If it's council's direction, we could look more specifically to the stormwater ponds specifically with regards to swimming in, bathing in, that sort of thing.
Councillor Schwinn.
I don't know if Jared's on the line, but how deep is the water at the stormwater ponds in May, June, July?
Through your chair, granted, Councillor Schwint. So it would depend. A typical, what we call a constructed wet pond, would have anywhere between 1 meter to 1.5 meters of standing water. The concern is through a storm event that can surge to 3.6 meters. So they can be quite dangerous, and water does come in there, can come in quite quickly. So there would be concern. Obviously, it's a litigious world, so there would be concerns about around the stormwater ponds. There's obviously dry ponds that the township has. There's no standing water at the time, but as rainfall events happen, they can fill up fairly quickly as well. So that's the concern.
Councillor Goodell.
Thanks, Chair, through you. I guess I share some of the concerns. We don't want to handcuff people. At the same time, we don't want to have things on our bylaw that aren't going to be enforced. So I was going to ask, historically, how has this been enforced? Not wanting you to give away any of your trade secrets, of course, but you kind of gave an answer. I think that it's still important to have something like this in the back pocket for bylaw should they need to go in and enforce repeat offenders or something. It's nice to know that it's kind of not the first course of action to go in and lay fines. I think that would be the wrong course to go down. So I don't see many concerns with this. In fact, I'm fine with the increase in the fine, having a bit more teeth, knowing that it's not going to be utilized as the first line of defense. And with that, I'll move the recommendation.
Was there any further discussion or? No, seeing none. So we have a mover. Do we have a seconder? All right, seconded by Councillor Bryant. All those in favor? Oh, sorry. More discussion around that? Mayor Shantz.
I think I can support it. I think I can support it, but maybe it's something that we can have a little more discussion on going forward in terms of where does the responsibility lie, I guess, for some of the protection, and maybe that's something we need to discuss with our liability, with our insurance, and then maybe that's. I don't know if it's an open session or a training session, but might be worthwhile.
Councillor Godot.
It didn't have to do with the comment, so I'll reserve if there were any other discussion around that.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in.
Well, then I'll
Okay,
make
yeah.
my comment now. I'm just wondering, does it have to do with the fact that we're raising the fine? Because if we kept the fine at its current rate, were there anything else in this report that was that raised flags for people?
Councillor Schwint.
No, to me, the fine was irrelevant. My point is we shouldn't be stopping people from doing recreational things outside, that people have to be responsible for themselves, as Mayor Shantz mentioned. So I just think that's overreach for us to have this in the bylaw.
So individuals playing on the storm drains at all, you would free up that and have free reign for ice rinks on storm drains? Okay. Perhaps Director Poupet, like, could you speak to the reasons why there are those in place?
Through Chair Grant to Councillor Cadeau. It's more the direction of the insurance pool, obviously, again, litigious world. And they are pieces of infrastructure that do pose a real danger and a harm. Signs alone aren't the greatest of deterrents. So I think having them included, I can't speak to the streams or ponds, a natural environment piece, but certainly when the township is the owner of a stormwater management facility that serves a purpose, and it's known that water does flow in and out and there is standing water, and you do try to construct them with, you know, appropriate side slopes, but believe that all municipalities are generally in line with that piece regarding litigation. It's all really is what it's doing, is trying to protect the municipality from paying exorbitant claims when people do injure themselves.
Councillor Goodell.
I tend to agree with that rationale, and we are developing outdoor rinks, you know, in St. Jacobs, for example. I would definitely want to direct our youth to some of those safe facilities if they wanted to leverage that. You know, we have splash pads, we do have recreational spots for kids. It's not nature, and I respect that, and I recognize that. But at the same time, I do worry about the liability issues with some of these storm drainages. So I don't know that I support just simply removing it from bylaw. Whether or not we kind of double down and enhance fines and et cetera, that's what we're having this conversation about. I'm not sure that I'm willing just to abandon that bylaw completely, though.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I wonder if it helps in the discussion that I believe we're talking about Section 8. Oh, and I just had it, but I had to scroll down. Section 8Y, is that right, of the bylaw? So that is under the section of activities subject to approval by the Director of Community and Recreation Services. So one thing that you could look at this as a way of thinking about it is, you know, if someone were to approach the township and ask for permission to create a skating rink on a township stormwater management pond, it sounds like the answer tonight would be no, right? There's township has liability concerns. We can't give you permission for that. If there was another area where, you know, we're talking about something much more minor, or, I mean, even let's say a teacher approaches Thomas and says, you know, can we have a school field trip and we're going to walk in the stream and look for frogs or something like that. That might be something that he could approve. So I wonder if that sort of changes the thinking, that it's this prohibition is without approval of the director.
Councillor Goodell.
Yeah, I suppose, but in a sense that I'm almost going to side with Councillor Schwint then. If a teacher has to come to council or to a director for permission for their students to walk in a stream, that's almost ludicrous in my mind. The stormwater is one thing, the streams and rivers is another. I would think some of the liability would have to rest with the adult that's supervising those children in a lot of respects. So you got to draw the line somewhere. And with that one, I'm not buying that one as much as like the stormwater piece.
Councillor Schwint.
And coming halfway to Councillor Cadeau, the skating thing on stormwater ponds, not a good idea. I can agree with that. It's walking in that, okay, 4-year-old kid's gonna
Right.
swim in that. Okay, they're gonna get muddy and dirty and that's enjoy being a kid, but tickets and having to call Thomas up for permission, can't buy that personally.
Well, and I would suspect honestly that won't happen. And if it doesn't happen, bylaw's not going to be going and searching out, the 10-year-olds for walking in the stream. However, having this in bylaws tool belt could help them, dissuade the teenagers from using the stormwater drains as their hockey rink. So I see the value in this. You can't have it both ways though, right? You either have this bylaw in place or you don't. The natural area, I think, is something that we need to flush out a bit more. Because those stormwater drainage areas they're created, but they're somewhat natural. I mean, if you were just driving by, some people might say, hey, look, it's a nice little pond. Let's go for a swim. I mean, most people probably wouldn't, but maybe some would. I don't know.
Mayor Shantz.
I'm not sure what all is in section 8Y, but the summary here is on any pond, stream, or river. It doesn't talk about stormwater drains or ponds. So it's not, this sounds to me like the natural environment, not the manufactured, if you want to call it that, environment. I don't know if Thomas or Jared can clarify.
Yeah, I think the intent would be to include storm ponds under ponds as well. We do have some other features, thinking of we have a large pond, man-made, but also somewhat natural that the township will be assuming in the Breslau, kind of between the Hopewell Heights and the Hopewell Crossing subdivision as well too. That's another good example there. But if council, maybe is wrestling with the walk-in piece, I think that's something that staff can definitely look at. Swimming and bathing in, skating on is a little bit of a concern from a liability perspective. That's fairly consistent throughout the region, if not the province. But I'm happy to take some direction from council. I think that we can definitely relax on the walk-in piece for sure.
Councillor Bryant.
Do we want to defer this till we can get clarification on this point? I think approving something that we're really torn about doesn't make sense. I would rather see it deferred, get clarification, and then bring it back to us.
So through you, Chair Grant, to council, we could possibly look at bringing this back next week, I believe, is our next council meeting. So we could bring it back to council next week with some further clarity and maybe on why, but also, I guess, a second kick at the can with regards to the recommendation on this specific item.
Thank you. I will turn to Clerk Smith because I believe we have put this through a second, so it is on the floor to vote, but I'm not sure how we would proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if someone were to move a motion to defer, that would take precedent over what we have on the floor. The only thing I would ask from a procedural perspective is to give a time frame, and if that next week time frame works for council, then it sounds like staff can have that back.
Councillor Bryant.
I would put that on the floor, just as you said.
All right, so there's a motion to defer. Is there a seconder? Councillor Schwint. All of those, or is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. Passed. And this brings us to the end of our staff reports. Moving on to other business, we do have an item, trees for Woolwich planting program, and Councillor Schwint. Seeing as you have requested this item, I will turn the floor to you.
Yep. As council is aware, we had a good discussion in closed session on the Trees for Woolwich program. I just want to bring out the public view and what the conversation direction I've been hearing from residents of the community. Definitely, I've been hearing that Woolwich residents care about the environment, they care about trees. They want more trees. However, the implementation of the Trees for Woolwich program has caused a lot of questions. I also want to say I've heard a lot of support for the volunteers Trees for Woolwich program. Volunteers make Woolwich special, and we have to say thank you for all the work they've been doing. From a 10,000-foot level, Trees for Woolwich program, we can all get behind. We want more tree coverage in the township. As residents living in the rural area like I do, it's nice to drive down a road and have trees. Having said that, we have to make sure that as a township, we respect our neighbors. Our neighbors, in this case, are the residents and the farmers in the fields, and respond to some of the questions and concerns they have. So from what I'm hearing and what I think we're going to recommend to staff is have a meeting this summer before the fall planting and talk to Trees for Woolwich, talk with staff and council to figure out how to better communicate the program and better accommodate residents' needs along with Trees for Woolwich needs and staff's needs. We heard a fair bit that ditching, they need room on side roads for ditching. We got to make sure trees don't encroach on township roads, but at the same time, we can't have trees encroaching on farmers' fields. If they're going to have a 20 or 30-foot diameter, that means currently the trees could be 10, 15 feet on the private property. We have to be able to strike a balance. So I'm hopeful that staff meetings, plural, I believe, over the summer will help us communicate better with residents and have a clear direction for all parties to make this program a success. My biggest fear is we're going to spend a whole lot of volunteer time and effort and be dissatisfied with results. So I think we're early enough in the process that we can make some tweaks and make a better program this fall. And I'm glad that we've had a good conversation earlier and believe the council's behind, I guess, some of those steps I just mentioned.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion or questions regarding this? Councillor Cadeau?
Thank you, Chair. Through you. This is something that had come up, and I was wondering if we could get an answer from staff on the placement of some of these trees. Sorry, I kind of stumbled with my speech there. The placement of some of these trees. There was questions around the certain size, certain side of the road in which these trees will be placed on. Is there a reason why we're choosing certain sides of the road?
Do you, Chair Grant, to Councillor Cadeau, in the absence of Carter being here, he would have better language around this, but it is to prevent drifting of snow. That is one of the predominant reasons that we've chosen the side of the road that we have chosen. We have selected wide road allowances. The Township of Woolwich has a lot of 40-foot wide road allowances, so that's not sufficient width for a road to have proper ditching. So you need at least 52 feet. So that's a challenge. So we excluded those areas. So it limited us to areas where we had at least 52 feet. I think it was around 66 feet, 20 meters is typically what we were aiming for, but that was the rationale. The other part of that though, Crow's Foot Road is a really great example that I was part of. It had beautiful tree coverage. I know my grandmother used to love driving that road. It was a wonderful road to drive. The unfortunate part, it was a horrible road to maintain. So as beautiful as it looked, it did create a number of climate zones through a winter event, for example. So if you don't have appropriate sun on a road, you can get a lot of freezing and icing conditions. Trees obviously cover that, prevent a lot of snow or sunlight from getting in, doing the melt. So Crow's Foot Road, we spent a few dollars for sure to remove and cut back those trees so we could get sun into that area. And I think it's a much safer road because of it, not as pretty. We did look to plant some, so they're at the newer stage, but that was another rationale for why we don't want to overcrowd the road. And the road doesn't perform well without getting sunlight on the road either. So we're not in arid climates like California where they want to promote coverage. You know, it's a different problem there. They have too hot temperatures to melt the asphalt. We're not in that situation here. So certainly there would be different case and different geography where you would appreciate tree coverage, but not when you have the 4 seasons that we have here.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion at all? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I suppose this one would be for CNO Brenneman. With questions like that have arisen, valid questions and questions that I wouldn't have even really considered. Is there a potential for us to develop some sort of messaging that we could roll out because there were a lot of great lessons learned as a result of this spring planning. It would be nice to kind of capture some of those and build off a lot of the great progress that those volunteers have made while taking into account some of the feedback that we've been getting.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Cadeau's question. Yeah, definitely. Lots of good lessons learned. I think the fundamental thing is the lessons learned can be used to enhance the letter that goes out to the residents, in particular the property owners that are going to be on the receiving end of trees. This round, what wasn't identified in the letters had to be dealt with by supplementary documentation in terms of answering questions in terms of why certain locations or how were we dealing with encroachment areas and things of that nature. But the key thing going forward for the fall, as I understand it, will be to ensure that the letters go out early enough and that they're comprehensive enough to deal with all possible issues, concerns that arose now, during the first round, but also lessons coming out of it. Allow for suitable buffer time frame between the letters. If people have any questions or concerns, that they have suitable time before actual planting occurs as well. So I think there's improvements around timing of communication, the communication piece itself, the buffer time period to allow for people to feel like they have their questions and concerns addressed before any planting occurs. And then also the ability to, through the raising of questions and concerns, to react and maybe pivot in certain circumstances to address concerns as they arise, and hopefully be able to apply a common sense to certain specific situations.
Councillor Schwinn.
Just following up on that, as that's developed over the summer, will council get an update, I guess, sometime before that communication goes out in September?
If that's what council would like, absolutely.
One councillor would anyway.
I look like that's the request there.
The will of council.
And do I also understand that staff will be looking at some plantings that happened this spring and report back, I guess, to you, CAO, Brenneman, and how that's looking?
Yes.
Right, thank you. Is there any other further discussion? Mayor Shantz.
Thank you. Not on this item, but another one. So we're, yeah. So there have been a number of concerns raised in particularly in Breslau, but over time it's been in all the communities about parking and stop signs and positioning of them. And I think council, I think we've dealt with this in public at different times, and I think council had a bit of an orientation session on it. But I wonder if staff would have anything to sort of enlighten and sort of a session 101 for the community on what you look at when you determine where to put parking, no parking, and where to put stop signs.
Through you, Chair Grant, to council. There's a few things there. I think maybe one thing that I should bring forward is that the township does have a traffic calming procedure in place. There hasn't been a report before council for a number of years, so I'll take that responsibility on, and we need to report this year on where we are. I think that'll be a good start to at least understand the traffic calming piece. It is a stepped approach, and the reason we engaged council and why council endorsed the traffic calming policy was because Traffic is one of those things where perception isn't always reality. And we do get a number of complaints. Obviously, everybody generally lives on a street. They see what happens, and we tend to gravitate towards the worst offender. And then that starts to form our perception of how that road is functioning, and the dangers that may exist on the road. So we struggled early on because we don't have a traffic division, but we struggled early on. And one of the ways we were able to sort of deal with the concerns raised was come up with a traffic calming procedure that was empirical data based, means that we spend money every year to get traffic data on the roads. And we typically work on a 3-year cycle. And that's quite good. Not all municipalities do that. So I think Township of Woolwich has a good handle on traffic volumes. And that's very helpful to watch how things progress on roads over time. It also determines what the speed of what we deem to be the 85th percentile. That's typically the metric that we use, which means that 85% of the cars driving on that road are traveling at or about this speed. Obviously, there are 15% that exceed that speed, but we're not making knee-jerk reactions for the 15%. That's typically how traffic calming policies are implemented. And once we realize if there is a speeding concern, then we move that on to step 1 measures, which would involve the knockdown bollards or line painting, radar speed signs, anything that we would seem to be not as significant a capital investment. If those measures do not have the results we're looking for to reduce speed, then we look to stage 2 measures, which would be hard infrastructure changes. You could do raised crosswalks, you could do curb bump outs, you could do speed humps. And we will be installing tabletop speed humps on Woolwich Street South this year between Dolman and the bridge, as there were just the measures weren't working. There was still excessive speeding, and so we received council endorsement for speed tables there. So that's where we go. It is a measured approach, and it does take time. We appreciate that because you do need to continue to get data. A lot of times, though, perception isn't reality. For example, the speeding concerns raised on in the Starlight Shallow Creek Trowbridge area, the data that we have is as we have 2021 data, we have 2022 data, and the 85th percentile is under 40 kilometers an hour. So that does not meet any stage 1 measures at all. You have to exceed the posted speed limit and you get points, and that starts to rank you on the severity of the issue. So currently, the data doesn't support any measures requiring traffic calming. Now, the other complicated piece that we have is when you have subdivisions that are in process of developing. So this bleeds into Mayor Shance's question regarding signage, no parking. So as part of a draft plan development process, the developer is required to provide on-street parking that's satisfactory to the township. And as a result of that, we also look to implement no parking on one side. Typically, we like to keep the no parking on the fire hydrant side generally. Makes sense that fire department can come down and has easy access to the fire hydrant. It doesn't always work that way, but that's a general statement that we look to do. The other challenge we run into is at the draft plan stage, you're guessing at what traffic patterns are going to look like. You're basing that on a traffic impact study that has been completed by the developer, and they've estimated to what they think those volumes would be, and that's why we look at potential stop conditions at various intersections. So it's really not until occupancy occurs where people start to move into the neighborhoods that you really start to understand how are things functioning, how do people operate and move around in the community. And then that's when when infrastructure services gets kind of parachuted in and looks at these things. So I just talking in generalities, that's sort of how the process works and why you could appreciate that it's not a one size fits all the time. We take our best guess generally at the development stage, and then as things start to unfold, we'll look at it a little more closely. In the case of the St. Boniface School, that's a difficult one because St. Boniface School was never contemplated, nor was it planned for during the draft plan of subdivision for the Empire subdivision. So right there is a problem to begin with. Typically, you look to plan for these things up front, and you have all of the necessary pieces in place. This is a retrofit, and it was a challenge, obviously. So staff spent a lot of time with the school board, with student transportation services to ensure that everybody was comfortable with what was being proposed. And that's what's being implemented now. We made a conscious decision to not implement things sort of mid-semester. we felt that it was more important to leave status quo alone with respect to stop conditions at the intersection of Starlight and Shallow Creek. And we would look to do some of that hard infrastructure change and then create the alternate stop control at that intersection during the summer months, so that when we start fresh in September, everything's there. We can communicate with the school so that they can put out notices as well to everybody acknowledging the changes. That's generally how we've worked around schools, is we work with the principal there for communication pieces. So that's a bit of a nutshell, I guess, on general approaches, but again, not one size fits all. So not every location is treated the same way.
Thank you. I'll go Mayor Shantz and then Councillor
Yeah,
Bryant.
thanks. Just one more follow-up if I could. And so what is our responsibility for unassumed roads? Because especially with all the development that is expected to happen in the next few years, we're going to have more and more. I think it's usually a year or two before we actually assume the road.
That's correct. Through you, Chair Grant, to Mayor Shantz. Unassumed roads are the responsibility of the developer. That's where they lie. The developer is responsible for maintenance and all of those obligations until such time that the township assumes it. And I appreciate that you have occupancy occurring while you have roads that are under the developer's care and control. So to the layperson, obviously it wouldn't look any different. Signs are in place, everything's functioning. But there is a division, and we are protected through the subdividers agreement. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I know that there are discussions occurring about improving some of the subdividers agreement, specifically revolving around some of those maintenance obligations during that time period. And generally, Mayor Shantz, you're correct in saying it's a 2-year minimum, but it could be longer. It could be 5 years before it becomes assumed by the township.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant.
Thank you. Through you to Jared. I've been out to the Shallow Creek, Starlight, Trowbridge area a few times. And particularly when school is letting out, and it is a horrible mess. And I hate to say that, but cars were parked everywhere. Kids were just running all over the place. People were running stop signs. Nobody was following the speed limits. Residents are really concerned about the safety of the kids because the school needs to set up a pickup program where the parents are going into the parking lot to pick the kids up. They were blocking driveways. I've never seen such it was just horrible to watch. It was a rainy, wet snow day, and the residents are getting very, very frustrated. They want to see Shallow Creek remain an always stop. Right now, from what I've been told, the proposal is to have them cross on Starlight, across towards Shallow Creek, across again, and then back to the other side of the road. So basically crossing 3 times to get back to the same side of the road to walk down to the school. They don't want to see that happen. They want to see that remain as a four-way stop when the road goes through. It's hard to explain, but I think it's something you have to sit through and watch how these parents pick up the kids. They're blocking driveways, they're parking in no parking zones. And I think you need to have a public consultation with the residents. I think the school needs to be brought into the picture because they're a big chunk of the problem. And I just think if we want to resolve the issues, we have to sit down with the residents and the school and find a way through this set of problems in the subdivision, because it's only going to get worse. We're dealing with single car drives and minimal parking, and they're parking in no parking zones, and not just when school's out. I've been through there a few different times, and they're parked on the wrong side of the road. And I mean, what do you do when somebody needs out of their driveway and they're blocked? How do they get out? Sorry, I'm just sort of rambling on here, but it's a whole bunch of issues that we need to get resolved, and we've got to figure a way forward for this. So I'm throwing it out there and see if we've got any answers to any of this, or how do we move forward? Can we do a community safety zone, or how do we do this?
To you, Chairman Grant, or Chairperson Grant, to Councillor Bryant. We attend all the school zone sites, so this is not unique, unfortunately, and that's sad to say. It is, because we've seen it in many school areas. Again, it's an education piece. It's parents, it's the school. The township has the roads into the school, but unfortunately, right now there is no consistency with respect to kiss and drops on school property, despite them being approved through site plan. So that's something that needs to be discussed further with staff and the school boards. That's something that is ongoing. I can share that. The changes that we're proposing at Shallow Creek and Starlight, I think this is very important on the traffic calming piece. Many people think that stop signs are traffic calming devices. That's not accurate. As a matter of fact, the most safe intersection you'll ever come across is an uncontrolled one, because everybody's head's on a swivel. They're always looking out because nobody has the right of way. So they're trying to figure out who does. So the moment you control an intersection, you provide a potential false sense of security, right? We see it, I think, more and more with people crossing at red lights, looking at their phones and that sort of thing. So that we do not look to put stop signs in without warrant conditions. The change we're making is because of how people are traversing to school. So people can walk down Starlight on both sides of the road with the proposed change, walk directly across Shallow Creek. And there is a always stop at Trowbridge and Starlight now. So the proximity to always stops need to be gapped out. You can't have an always stop and always stop and always stop all along the way. So again, we vetted this through with student transportation services who are quite concerned, obviously, about children crossing and getting to school. They have policies in place that if there's discontinued sidewalk, they need to be bused. So I would say that student transportation services is absolutely an advocate for child safety and child welfare. So we did talk to them. They've been satisfied, as well as the school board, with the proposals being placed at this location. But I think we all can appreciate driver behavior is one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. And that is a tough task. That is really education and enforcement. We have had police attend. Bylaw cannot attend moving violations. We know that. So it has to be police only. Obviously, there's not enough police to attend every single school zone. I know that the region is moving on to looking at ASC, the automated speed enforcement program, across the region at all school. Now, that's not going to be an overnight fix. There is a lot of work to be done there, and a lot of time and energy and investment to be made for that. I don't want anybody to think this is going to happen overnight by any means. But one of the ways that they're going to look to implement ASC across school zones consistently across the region would be to look at making them community safety zones for the school zone. So it is school zone. It is zone to school zone. All of our schools are. That's already in place, but in order for them to be enforceable under ASC, more prevalent, and I forgive me, I don't have all the information at my fingertips, but there is a move to look to make consistency across the region and having community safety zones at school zones and able to enforce that. So I think there is a lot here. Certainly the township and staff have met many times. We met at Breslau Public School this year. I know that we have had staff attend many times already at St. Boniface this year and in the past. So, I would hope that nobody's thinking that nobody's taking this seriously, because we do. But I think you're right, Councillor Bryant, that the solution involves many, many parties.
Thank you. And one other quick follow-up. This may be Jeff. We have the quarry back in the same area. Residents are complaining about kids getting dropped off at the edge of Starlight and Shallow Creek, where it's sectioned off, and they're walking back into the quarry with coolers and whatnot, coming out in some cases drunk and getting into cars and driving away. And the residents are a little upset with what they're seeing happening, because they feel the police aren't looking after it and they don't know what to do, but they are concerned with what they're seeing going on back there, because they're walking through a construction site to get there as well. Anything we can do about that?
So through you, Madam Chair. It's unfortunately not a bylaw matter that we can look at. Both the moving violation and all really, the moving violation, the trespass to property, and drunk or youth drinking is all controlled by the police. Really, I think the best thing we can tell a resident to do is report that to Waterloo Region Police Services, and I mean, keep reporting it every time they see it. I'm sure that's not a great answer, but I'm not sure I have anything better, to be perfectly honest.
Mr. Brenneman.
Yeah, I just wanted to advise council that as a result of some recent communication, I have connected with the staff that we normally connect with the Waterloo Regional Police, specifically on the moving violations and the speeding concerns, etc. He's assured me that both the traffic division and central division, which happens still to oversee Breslau, will make this a priority. Tomorrow, I will also raise the additional concern about the quarry and ask that they have some targeted enforcement of that as their time and schedule permits.
Thank you, because as we're heading into the nicer weather, we know the quarry activities are going to increase tremendously.
Yeah, and I don't know if that was an area last year that was targeted or Snyder's Flats. They might have been both actually, but it's not something that when the police become aware, if there's an ability to know about specific events happening on specific dates, obviously they can target. It's the random events and random things that obviously it's more difficult to enforce. But I know when they know about quarry events that happen, just because the police have the advantage nowadays of having social media and things get passed around, and then they can do a targeted, prioritized type of enforcement.
Thank you. Was there any other items? Seeing none, I know there was a council report, but I'm not sure, Councillor Bryant, if that was the Breslau traffic was, yeah, I figured we pretty much addressed that. So that really just leaves us with outstanding activity list. Is there any items that anyone like to discuss? Councillor Schwinn?
I had a list of items on one phone call last week. I know taxation on the Order of Mennonite churches is up for review later on this year, and severances will probably be part of the official plan. But in light that it's been 7 years, is the township or is the council prepared to look at anything with terms of taxation in the meantime until we can get severances approved? Is that something that would be discussed at a later date?
CO Brenneman?
So I think this might fall and need some help, in terms of Mr. Petherick. But I mean, we've had MPAC in before, and ultimately to make the changes I believe that you're looking for, we would have to have some involvement for MPAC or some actions that we would take out of the legislation. But I don't think it's necessarily as easy as just council making a decision that you're going to waive taxes or things of that nature, if that's where you're going. But Richard, you might want to comment on that.
Mr. Petherick?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, through you, Chair Grant. It really kind of comes down more to the planning side of things, because from the assessment, I believe MPAC says that's not the mechanism they would use to be able to make them exempt. The problem with the Mennonite churches in the community is that they're on properties that are not owned by themselves. If they were separated properties, then they would be deemed as a church and they would be exempt from taxes. The fact is that they're still owned by the original owner and they're just allowed to be on that property. Therefore, that taxation or that exemption can't exist on that property until it's a separate parcel. So I think that's probably more of that planning issue than it is more of a taxation and assessment.
Thank you. Yeah, Diane?
I just wanted to remind council that we are working on our official plan where we would be including some policy framework around severances of those properties as well.
Is there any other discussion on that? Are there any other items to come forward? All right, seeing none, that brings us to the end of our meeting. Is there anyone willing to put a motion on the floor to adjourn the meeting? Always. Moved by Councillor Cadeau, seconded by Councillor Bryant. All in favor? Thank you very much. That is passed. I will just say, given tonight's conversation, I'll maybe echo the words of my predecessor, Larry Shantz, on slowing down when you're driving in our communities these days. I know that was an issue that he was quite passionate about. So this does bring us to the end of our meeting, and I would like to thank all who participated or tuned into the meeting tonight on our YouTube live stream. I will remind council to stay connected until we receive confirmation that the live stream has stopped. And good night, everyone.